Good morning, and welcome to the third part, I think, on this panel. I wanted to do a voiceover with this one. I was working on it, and if you follow me on YouTube or social media, you know that this panel was or is meant to be an experimental panel where I can try stuff out with oil paint without setting my main bigger panels for my exposition back. The thing was that I actually just totally froze up. I was wondering what's the point of starting panels with the point of experimentation if you're still trying to control the whole process. So I'm gonna try some stuff here in this part, and it may break rules regarding oil paint and certain fat over lean. I don't even know. Guys, this is the problem with me experimenting with oil paint, is that I feel like all this information that I read somewhere one day at some point is floating around in my head, and I can't really structure it. And it's physically freezing me. It's stopping me from doing things. And this all sounds very dramatic, but you have to understand that I'm here in my studio alone. And even though I like being alone, sometimes when you're alone with a ton of thoughts, it can be very counterproductive. So we're gonna break that frozen state here by doing some stuff. I have my palette that I've been working with on this panel for the last 2 sessions, which is a limited palette of some umbers and some burnt sienna and some white. And what I wanted, my issue with oil paint sometimes is that it blends a little bit too well, right? What I want is to build layers of texture that are coherent, that form a union, but at the same time catch enough light. They have enough depth to create shadows. And really, at this point, I'm wondering, how can I build these layers so that I can get to know these layers, and that in the future I know that I have to start maybe with certain layers in order to get to a certain point, right? This is probably makes no sense, but the thing with oil in comparison to acrylic paint is that it takes a long ass time before you can get started on the next layer. So for me, that means that sometimes I forget what I did in layer number, I don't know, 2 or 3, because by the time that you can start layer 4, you've already been working for a week or 2 weeks. Okay, so this is kind of a documentation. What works, what doesn't work, what I need to change in the next try, etc., etc. I have some old paint. I work with umbers and burnt sienna, and these are pigments that dry pretty quickly. So this is paint from 24 hours ago, and also some paint from 48 hours ago. And obviously it's starting to dry up. So I tried working with that paint that is a little bit old. And I also have some, you saw me adding this powder, which is marble dust. I used it before on acrylic paint, and it creates nice, almost dryish texture, like it's dry. And I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that it also makes your paint layer a little bit more brittle, because you're adding what is essentially a pigment powder without adding any extra oil. Now, the thing that I read about adding stuff to your paint is that when you buy paint, it has a sort of perfect ratio between the oil, the binder, and the amount of pigment. Okay, and when you change that, you are basically changing the perfect ratio. So when you add more oil, you add more binder, you get more oil and less pigment. And obviously, I think a lot of people know what happens then. It's going to take a little longer to dry. But when you add more pigment, and marble dust and any paint becomes, I think, more brittle. Basically, there is not enough binder in there. So you create a paint layer that is, I think, in a way less stable, if you will. Now, there is an amount that you can add without completely destroying your paint layer. And there are other factors, I think, involved in keeping a more brittle paint layer structurally sound. So one of the things that I do, I used to do that with acrylic paint as well, which is, I think, good practice, is I work on a panel, okay? Because you can imagine that if you put a brittle paint layer, whether it's acrylic or oil, on a canvas that warps and that moves and it's not a rigid surface, that causes your paint to break even more. I have a video on here on my YouTube channel with where I make a Crackle paste, which is basically just the ultimate brittle paint layer, right? You create it in order to create that Crackle. And what I've found also is that it works better on canvas and on paper than it does on panel. Okay, so that's the logic in adding stuff like marble dust or chalk to your paint. So what I want to do here, what I did here, is I tried to limit the amount that I added. And you can go very slowly until you get a paint that has a texture that you want, that you can work with, and then just don't add more. Okay, you don't need to add that much. I decided not to speed up this video because I wanted to show that it takes, I think, slow working to organize your texture, if you will. I cut out all the moments where I sat back and decided on what to do, which is probably, I ended up editing 1/3 of the video out. So that means that 2/3 I've been sitting staring at what to do. And I think that when it comes to working with texture, thinking about what you want to do is probably more than half the work. We can learn how to technically build texture and what to add in order to make paint behave in a certain way, but at the end of the day, texture is quite a statement that you make, because not only are you adding paint, but you're adding an interaction with environmental light. The light in the environment, because when you change the light, you change the painting, because the texture is three-dimensional, so it's going to catch light and it's going to create shadows. And that is, I think, much more dramatic than when you add shadows with paint or you add highlights with paint. So that being said, I think it's smart to think about not only the placement of texture, but also maybe wonder what you're trying to express with this texture. Is it to emphasize a shape, or is it to create a certain direction, or perhaps to add a little bit of drama to certain areas? And to think about that in combination with the placement. I found that when you place texture randomly throughout your painting or throughout your entire painting, that it can get very maybe overwhelming, but at the same time sometimes underwhelming, because there is so much going on that nothing really focuses the eye of the viewer. Okay, so we're near the end of this video. I'm gonna make another video about this project later on. I hope this made sense. It was just me sharing my thoughts with you. Really, for me, this is a learning process. Currently, it makes me very anxious. So I'm trying to structure what I learn and what I'm doing in the best way that I can. So if you have any comments or questions or advice you want to give me, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.